I'm afraid of tear. I fear for my life. These were the words that a brilliant Mexican scientist confided to his closest friend, just days before disappearing without a trace. Jacobo Grinberg-Zylberbaum was no ordinary man. He published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, directed a research institute, and his experiments on telepathy had attracted the attention of one of the most powerful intelligence agencies in the world. 30 years later, his family is still searching for answers. His wife mysteriously disappeared. His investigations vanished. And the documents declassified by the CIA only deepened the enigma. This is the story of the scientist who may have discovered something he should never have found. On December 8, 1994, in the heart of Mexico City, a man disappeared. He was not a stranger. He was not a criminal. He was one of the most controversial and fascinating neuroscientists Mexico had ever produced. Jacobo Grinberg-Zylberbaum was 47 years old. He held a doctorate from New York. He was a professor at UNAM, National Autonomous University of Mexico. He authored more than 50 scientific articles and 54 books. He was the founder of the National Institute for the Study of Consciousness. But Jacobo did not investigate conventional topics. While his colleagues studied memory and perception, he documented surgeries performed by healers without anesthesia. While others dismissed telepathy as pseudoscience, he published experiments suggesting that two brains could synchronize remotely. On the morning of December 8th, Jacob left his house. 4 days later he would turn 48. A family celebration awaited him. He never arrived. His car turned up at the airport. His passport was at home. His wife offered conflicting explanations before she disappeared as well. And when the authorities finally began investigating, 5 months later, they uncovered something disturbing. Jacobo had been secretly traveling to the United States. His research appeared in classified CIA files. And someone had systematically erased all traces of his work. 30 years later, his family is still asking, what happened to Jacobo Grinberg? Did he discover something he shouldn't have? Was he murdered? Was he kidnapped? Did he disappear voluntarily? To understand this mystery, we have to go back to the childhood of a boy who became obsessed with unraveling the secrets of the human mind. Jacobo Grinberg was born on December 12, 1946, into a Jewish family that had found refuge in Mexico. He grew up in a rapidly expanding Mexico City, in a home where education and knowledge were sacred. But at the age of 12, something changed his life forever. His mother died of a malignant brain tumor. Jacobo watched her deteriorate. He saw how that 1.5 kilo organ, that mass of neurons and connections, could steal everything from a person: their memories, their personality, their essence. And at that moment, faced with the pain of the loss, she made a decision. He would dedicate his life to understanding the human mind. She studied psychology at UNAM, standing out among her classmates. But Mexico in the 1960s did not offer the tools she needed for her ambitions. In 1963, at just 17 years old, he traveled to Israel. He spent a year living on a kibbutz, learning Hebrew, connecting with his roots. There he met Lizette Arditi, his first wife. And there, in the mystical city of Safed, he was introduced to Kabbalistic teachings. But Jacobo was not a mystic. He was a scientist. He traveled to New York and earned his doctorate in psychophysiology at the prestigious Brain Research Institute. He learned to use electroencephalograms to measure brain activity, to translate human experience into measurable data. When he returned to Mexico in the 1970s, he had a clear mission: to build world-class research laboratories. He founded one at Anahuac University. Later, another at UNAM. His colleagues respected him. He was meticulous, rigorous. He published in serious journals. But then, something happened that would change the course of his career. And this is where the story gets strange. In the late 1970s, someone told Jacob about an extraordinary woman. Her name was Barbara Guerrero, but everyone knew her as Pachita. She was a healer who practiced in the Juarez neighborhood of Mexico City. They said she cured cancer, that she performed surgery without anesthesia, that she removed tumors with her bare hands and a simple hunting knife. Jacob was skeptical. Of course he was. He had dedicated years to studying the brain from the most rigorous perspective of neuroscience. This sounded like quackery, but he decided to go, to see for himself. And what he witnessed that night challenged everything he thought he knew about reality. Years later, in an interview, Jacobo would describe that moment with words that revealed his astonishment. "I am a scientist, I have a laboratory, I study brain physiology. I was invited to meet this woman, Pachita, and see her operations. What I saw there contradicted every principle and every piece of knowledge I had about reality." Jacobo described how Pachita performed complex surgical procedures in a matter of minutes, without modern medical instruments, without sterilization, without anesthesia. And the patients not only didn't scream in pain, some reported feeling better. For almost a year, Jacobo followed Pachita. He observed her. He documented her. He struggled with the cognitive dissonance this caused him. Was it fraud? Was it suggestion? Or was there something more? He himself admitted it. "After the first surgery session, I went out into the street feeling like a spirit and experiencing my body as a kind of vehicle." That encounter changed Jacobo forever. He began to wonder, what if consciousness was more than just neural activity? What if reality was more malleable than Western science was willing to accept? And so his most controversial work was born, the Syntergic Theory. The Syntergic Theory was ambitious, revolutionary, and for many scientists, completely absurd. Jacob proposed that human consciousness was not confined to the individual brain. He suggested that there is a kind of invisible network, a grid, or lattice, that connects all the consciousnesses in the universe. According to his theory, the brain doesn't generate consciousness, it tunes into it, like a radio that picks up waves that already exist in the air. It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? But Jacob didn't just stop at theories. He designed experiments to test them. The most famous experiment was called transferred potential, and the results were very disturbing. Here's how it worked. Two people, who had previously interacted to create an emotional connection, were placed in separate Faraday cages. These chambers are designed to completely block any electromagnetic signals. Think of them as cages that prevent any radio waves, Wi-Fi, or cell phone signals from entering or leaving. The first person was shown intermittent flashes of light. Their brain was monitored with an electroencephalogram that recorded the electrical response to these stimuli. The second person was in complete darkness, without any stimuli, with no way of knowing what was happening to the first person. And yet, when the first person saw the flashes, the second person's brain showed similar patterns on their electroencephalogram, as if they too were seeing the flashes. But there was no possible physical connection. Ruth Cerezo, one of her closest collaborators, explained it this way. "They put us in two Faraday chambers and send flashes of light. When they record my electroencephalogram, the same patterns appear as in your brain." Jacobo meticulously documented this. And in 1994, just months before his disappearance, he published his findings in Physics Essays, a peer-reviewed scientific journal. The title was technical, but the implication was explosive: the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox in the brain, the transferred potential. He was suggesting that human brains could exhibit quantum entanglement, the same phenomenon that Einstein called spooky action at a distance. The Mexican scientific community tore him apart. They branded him a pseudoscientist, a charlatan, and accused him of betraying the principles of the scientific method by chasing New Age fantasies. As his brother would summarize it years later, he was very shamanic to scientists and very scientific to shamans. But someone else was paying attention to his work. Someone with almost unlimited resources and motivations that Jacob probably never fully imagined. The United States government. December 1994. Mexico was going through one of its most turbulent years. The Zapatista uprising. The assassination of Luis Donaldo Colosio. José Francisco Ruiz Massieu shot dead. And at the end of the month, the December mistake would sink the national economy. Amid this national chaos, Jacobo Grinberg's personal life was quietly falling apart. His marriage to Teresa Mendoza was a mystery to those who knew him. They had married suddenly, in secret, in a town in Morelos, just a few weeks after meeting. His brother, actor Ari Telk, remembers it with discomfort. One week we found out that they got married in a town in Morelos, while riding in a van, and they were already living together. I distanced myself. I had a bad feeling about it. And his instincts were correct. On the night of December 5, 1994, just 3 days before he disappeared, Jacobo attended the premiere of a play with his stepmother. It was a family evening. It must have been pleasant. But when they left the theater, Jacob confessed something to her that she would never forget. He told her he was expecting an invitation to travel to India and Israel. New projects. New experiments. The possibility of a new beginning. And then she added something that chilled her stepmother's blood. I don't want to take Teresa with me. I'm scared. She puts a lot of pressure on me. I'm not sleeping at home anymore. I'm sleeping in the van. A 47-year-old scientist, director of a research institute, sleeping in his truck because he was afraid of his wife. His close friend, Marco Antonio Caram, had heard similar words days before. I'm afraid of Tyr. I fear for my life. Why was she afraid? What had she seen? What did she know? 3 days later, those questions would become urgent. Because on December 8, 1994, Jacobo Grinberg left his house and never returned. Reconstructing exactly what happened on December 8th is like putting together a jigsaw puzzle with most of the pieces missing. But here's what we know. Teresa Mendoza was the last person who admitted to seeing Jacobo alive. According to her version, which she would change multiple times, Jacobo left home that morning like any other day. But he didn't arrive at his lab at UNAM. He didn't answer calls. He didn't show up at any of the scheduled meetings. That same day, Teresa called Jacobo's office. And she told them something strange, that Jacobo had suddenly decided to travel. First he mentioned Campeche. Then he changed his story and said they had gone to India. But no one in the lab had been notified of any trip. And for someone like Jacobo, described by his colleagues as extremely responsible with his research group, this was completely out of the ordinary. Ruth Cerezo, her closest collaborator, makes it clear. When he disappeared, we notified the faculty and they said, well, he must be traveling. Well, I don't think so because he was very, very responsible with his research group, extremely responsible, and he loved what he did. Days passed. Jacob did not appear. On December 12th, 4 days later, Jacobo would turn 48. His stepmother had prepared a celebration. They had planned it together that night at the theater. Jacob never arrived. Worried, the stepmother called the UNAM laboratory. Her secretary gave her a nonsensical answer. The doctor has already gone to India. To India? Without telling his family? Without celebrating his birthday? Without even saying goodbye? Something was terribly wrong. In January, a month after the disappearance, the family finally gained access to the apartment where Jacobo lived with Teresa. The goalkeeper confirmed their fears. They told us they had already left in December. But what they found inside the apartment was even more disturbing. Missing manuscripts. Years of handwritten research. Because Jacobo wrote everything by hand, slept 3 hours a day, and wrote non-stop, simply vanished. Hard drives removed from computers. Complete theses from his students, also gone. As if someone had methodically wiped away any trace of his work. And then they found something that chilled the blood of the researchers. According to the doorman and later confirmed by the commander in charge of the case, voodoo dolls with pins stuck in them. What did this mean? Who was Teresa Mendoza, really? Meanwhile, Jacobo's car had been found at the Mexico City airport. It seemed like the perfect clue. He had taken a flight. Except there was no record of Jacobo ever having boarded a plane. No airline had his name on it. No international flight showed his departure. And there was a simple reason for that. Her passport was at home. All her IDs. All her personal belongings. Everything she would need to travel was still there. So why was his car at the airport? Was it a red herring? An attempt to mislead? Or was there another explanation? And this is where the case gets even stranger. In the midst of the search for Jacobo, Teresa Mendoza also disappeared. She didn't notify the authorities. She didn't search for her husband publicly. She didn't ask her family for help. She simply left. Commander Clemente Padilla, the detective who would eventually take the case, managed to tap phones. And he discovered that Teresa had communicated with her mother from Baja California. Witnesses reported seeing her taking objects out of the house where she and Jacob lived. What was he taking out? Evidence? The lost manuscripts? Valuables? We'll never know, because Teresa Mendoza disappeared off the face of the earth. And when Padilla tried to track her down officially, he discovered something chilling. The name Teresa Mendoza did not appear in any official record of her alleged academic background. Was it a false name? A fabricated identity? Who was this woman really? Here comes the most frustrating part of this whole case. Mexican authorities did not officially begin their investigation until May 1995, 5 months after the disappearance. 5 months in which the evidence was lost. Witnesses forgot details. The trails went cold. Why did it take so long? Teresa argued that it was normal for Jacobo to go on trips without notice. And apparently, that was enough for the authorities for months. When the investigation was finally opened, the case fell into the hands of Commander Clemente Padilla, a detective with an impeccable reputation. He had never left a case unsolved. And Padilla began to uncover things that pointed to a conspiracy much bigger than anyone imagined. Clemente Padilla was methodical, patient, and when he began to unravel the Grinberg case, what he unraveled was a tangle of secrets, clandestine trips, and possible links with foreign intelligence agencies. The first important clue came from flight records that Padilla managed to obtain after pressuring U.S. authorities. Jacobo Grinberg and Teresa Mendoza had been entering and leaving the United States multiple times. But they never went directly to their destination. They used alternate routes, connecting flights, as if they wanted to make it harder to track them. And what was their final destination? Boulder, Colorado. Padilla discovered evidence that Jacobo had been secretly collaborating with a university in Boulder. No official records. No formal contract. And strangest of all, not even his family knew. What was he doing there? Who had contacted him? Why all the secrecy? And then Padilla found a witness. Or rather, he received information from one. A gas station worker in Boulder claimed to have last seen Jacobo Grinberg. But he wasn't alone. According to this witness, 2 Americans, identified as Rick Howard and Marina Velasco, got off a Cessna airplane. They put Jacobo, and supposedly Teresa as well, into 2 white cars. And they left. Now, there's a critical problem we need to point out. Padilla was never able to interview this witness personally. The information came through third parties. Which doesn't mean it's false, but neither can we confirm it as fact. Even so, if this testimony were real, the implications would be chilling. Who were Rick Howard and Marina Velasco? Why a Cessna airplane? Where did they take him? And the most unsettling question, was it voluntary? For years, Jacobo's family fought for answers. The investigation stalled. Padilla was relieved of the case just as he was uncovering the most promising leads. And then, in 2017, something extraordinary happened. The CIA declassified 930,000 documents. 12 million pages of files covering the period from the 1940s to the 1990s. Information on UFOs, mind control experiments, prisoner interrogations, and studies on telepathy. Among those millions of pages, an article written by Jacobo Grinberg himself appeared. It was titled, Psychophysiological Correlates of Communication Gravitation and Unity. Published in 1982 in the book Psychoenergetics. The document was archived within the framework of Project Stargate. What was Project Stargate? During the Cold War, paranoia between the United States and the Soviet Union was not limited to nuclear weapons and conventional spies. Rumors circulated that the Soviets were investing massive resources in psychic research, mind reading, remote viewing, telepathic influence. The idea that an agent could see military secrets without being physically present, or that they could influence the decisions of enemy leaders with the power of their mind. It was too tempting, or too terrifying, to ignore. Project Stargate was born in the United States. A secret program that sought to provide a scientific explanation for phenomena such as clairvoyance, out-of-body experiences, and telepathy for use in combat. The program lasted for decades. It involved universities, private laboratories, and scientists from all over the world. And among them, apparently, was Jacobo Grinberg. Clemente Padilla, the detective who investigated the case, developed his own theory about what might have happened. Years later, in interviews, he shared his conclusion. The only reason we could find is that the RAND Corporation is a U.S. State Department company that controls all science. They had already conducted an experiment on a submarine where they could send a message out using their minds. So imagine if there were someone who had the means to find the system. In other words, Padilla suggests that Grinberg had discovered something extremely valuable, a method for telepathic communication that could have military applications. And if that's true, what would you do if you were an intelligence agency? Would you allow that knowledge to be freely published? Or would you try to control it? Here's a detail that complicates the narrative. In 1995, just a year after Grinberg's disappearance, the CIA officially concluded that Project Stargate had not been functional. The experiments yielded no militarily useful results. The program was canceled. Does this mean the CIA had nothing to do with Grinberg? Possibly. Or does it mean they publicly shut down the project while more sensitive investigations continued behind the scenes? That's also possible. We have no way of knowing for sure. But there is another detail that fuels suspicions of conspiracy. One of Jacobo's brothers handed over a complete case file to a high-ranking police chief. It contained all the investigations, all the documents, all the leads the family had gathered. The next day, when he went to follow up, he was informed that the file had been lost. A complete file. Missing. Just like Jacobo. Bureaucratic incompetence? Perhaps. Or was someone making sure certain clues never saw the light of day? That's also possible. 30 years later, we still don't have definitive answers. But we have enough information to construct several theories. Some more plausible than others. None completely satisfactory. We're going to analyze them one by one, with intellectual honesty. Without sensationalism. But also without dismissing what seems improbable. Because, as Arthur Conan Doyle said, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Let's see what's left. Theory 1. Domestic murder. The most conventional theory, Teresa Mendoza killed Jacobo. Arguments in favor. Jacobo was afraid of her. He said so explicitly. He slept in his truck to avoid her. His friends knew about Teresa's outbursts of anger. Teresa disappeared just as the search began. Why run away if you're innocent? His identity was suspicious. His supposed academic background did not appear in official records. The voodoo dolls in the apartment suggest a disturbed mentality. And the family is clear. Lizette Arditi, the first wife, declared, Teresa probably killed Jacobo. We have to find Teresa. If she had nothing to do with it, she would be looking just like the rest of us. But, viewpoints. There is no body. No forensic evidence of violence. How to explain the car at the airport? How to explain the missing manuscripts? The stolen theses? Did Teresa have the knowledge to identify which research to steal? And most importantly, how to explain the secret trips to Colorado? The connection to Project Stargate? If it was a crime of passion, there are too many other variables that don't fit. Theory 2. Kidnapping by U.S. intelligence. The conspiracy theory. The CIA or some other agency kidnapped Grinberg because his discoveries were too valuable or dangerous. Arguments in favor. His work appears in declassified files from Project Stargate. Secret trips to Colorado without official registration. The testimony, unconfirmed, that he was picked up by Americans in a small plane. The moment, he was about to conduct a telepathy experiment between Mexico and India that could have been a major breakthrough. Obstruction of the investigation. Padilla was relieved of his duties just as he had found the most promising leads. The case file mysteriously disappeared. But, viewpoints. Why kidnap him instead of simply offering him a job and funding? Grinberg wasn't anti-American. If he had been offered resources to continue his research, he probably would have accepted. Project Stargate was cancelled in 1995 because it was concluded that it didn't work. If Grinberg had made revolutionary discoveries, why cancel the program? And what role does Teresa play in all this? Was she an agent? That seems extreme. And the Boulder witness was never personally verified by Padilla. Theory 3. Corporate conspiracy/Rand Corporation. A variant of the previous theory, it wasn't the government directly, but private defense contractors. Padilla specifically mentioned the Rand Corporation, a think tank that works closely with the U.S. Department of Defense. The logic: if Grinberg had indeed discovered a working method of telepathic communication, its military and commercial value would be incalculable. Instantaneous communication that cannot be intercepted. That doesn't depend on satellites or cables. For a defense corporation, this would be worth billions. But again, there is no direct evidence. Only speculation based on Padilla's comments. Theory 4. Voluntary disappearance. What if Jacob simply left? Arguments in favor. He was under immense pressure. Criticized by the scientific community. In a toxic marriage. He mentioned wanting to travel to India and Israel. He had a history of extended travel. He spent a year on a kibbutz in Israel in his youth. Perhaps he found a way to leave the country without using his official passport. Perhaps he started a new life somewhere else. But this explains almost nothing. Why leave your passport but take your car to the airport? Why disappear 4 days before his birthday from a celebration he himself planned? Why not contact his family in 30 years? His children? And again, who stole his manuscripts and theses? This theory requires us to ignore too many clues. Theory 5. The unexplainable. And finally, there is a theory that is a favorite of some of his most devoted followers, although the most difficult to take seriously. What if Jacobo Grinberg really achieved his goal? His Syntergic Theory proposed that consciousness can alter reality. That perception creates the structure of the universe. That with sufficient mastery, one could literally modify the matrix of existence. His studies with shamans convinced him that impossible phenomena were possible. He saw Pachita perform surgeries that defied physics. What if Jacob reached such an advanced state of consciousness that he simply transcended? That he literally disappeared from this reality? Now, let's be clear, there is no scientific evidence to support this possibility. It violates everything we understand about physics, biology, and the nature of matter. But Jacobo would have appreciated it if we had at least considered the question. After all, he dedicated his life to exploring the boundaries between the possible and the impossible. In the end, this is what we can state without speculation. 1. Jacobo Grinberg was a legitimate scientist whose research, although controversial, was published in peer-reviewed journals. 2. He disappeared under mysterious circumstances on December 8, 1994. 3. His wife Teresa Mendoza also disappeared and has never been found. 4. Years of research, manuscripts, theses, hard drives, disappeared with him. 5. He had documented connections to CIA investigations into psychic phenomena. 6. The official investigation was obstructed from multiple angles. And 7. 30 years later, nobody knows what happened to him. Jacobo Grinberg-Zylberbaum lived on the border between science and mysticism, between the laboratory and shamanic ritual, between mathematical equations and inexplicable experiences. For some, he was a visionary ahead of his time. For others, a brilliant scientist lost in mysticism. And for still others, perhaps he discovered something that put him on the path of forces that preferred to keep him silent. His daughter Usha continues to search for answers. His brother Ari carries the pain of loss and the frustration of not knowing. His family needs closure that may never come. And somewhere, a lifetime's discoveries, handwritten on nights of creative insomnia, are lost, or hidden, or destroyed. What did those manuscripts contain? The keys to understanding consciousness? Evidence of phenomena rejected by conventional science? Or simply the obsessions of a man who desperately wanted to believe that reality was more than it seemed? The case of Jacobo Grinberg reminds us of something unsettling, that we live in a world where people can simply disappear, where questions sometimes have no answers, where mystery, despite our smartphones and constant surveillance, still exists. It reminds us that between science and spirituality, between the known and the unknown, there is a gray area where truth becomes elusive. And it leaves us with a question that each of us must answer for ourselves. In a universe that produces as much wonder as horror, as much beauty as mystery, what really happened to the man who dedicated his life to understanding consciousness? What do you think happened to Jacobo Grinberg? Domestic crime? Government conspiracy? Voluntary disappearance? Or something we can't even imagine? Leave it in the comments. I love reading your theories, and who knows, maybe together we can find a clue that's been overlooked. If this case fascinated you as much as it did me, give this video a like. Share it with someone who also enjoys unsolved mysteries. And subscribe because every week we explore cases like this, real, well-investigated, and deeply unsettling. In the description I left links to declassified CIA documents, articles about Project Stargate, and interviews with Jacobo's family for anyone who wants to investigate further. Thank you for joining me in this investigation. Thank you for keeping Jacobo Grinberg's memory alive. And thank you for remembering that behind every mystery, there is a real person, a suffering family, and questions that deserve answers. See you in the next video. And remember, reality is always stranger than we imagine.